Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Appalachian Brewing Company podcast. It's Mike Parker, Artie, the brewmaster, joining you here from the third floor studios at the headquarters of Appalachian Brewing Company in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Artie, how's it going?
Good, Mike. Just a beautiful day out there. It's getting warm, but, that leads to a lot of good drinking.
That's true. The heat of summer is upon us. We finally got into the consistent 80 to 85 degree mark here in central Pennsylvania, down here along the Susquehanna River Valley. And like you said, not a bad time to end your day, or hell, start your day, Artie, if you want to, with an ice cold Appalachian Brewing Company beer. And so, first question, we'll kick things off. What are you drinking?
I got the hop offering today, Mike, and it's I just sort of fallen in love with this beer. It's our session IPA, really nice, crisp, easy drinking. I can have a few of them in an evening and sort of sit back and enjoy it.
Good end of the day beer, and for me, it's a great time of year because I am a fan of wheat beers. You guys have a grapefruit Hefeweizen on tap right now, one of the summer seasonals here at ABC, and I take a little sip here, and it's not my first sip, just so you know, so I can speak. It's really good. The grapefruit is very pronounced, yet you still get that signature, Hefe yeast that what everybody sort of describes, that sweet, almost bananas, like clove, flavor that the yeast creates in a Hefe. And about this beer, this is perfect, but this actually started off, and you guys had the 20th anniversary of the company last year, and you brewed a special 2 years ago, 20th anniversary Imperial Grapefruit Hefe, and that was popular, and this sort of came out of that one.
Yeah, you bet. The Imperial was a great beer, but it was strong, and you get that strong beer going into summer, and people were pounding a couple down and found themselves a little on the edge there. So what happened was we took it and moved it down to a base Hefe strength, sort of rindy grapefruit flavor, along with the banana clove of the Hefe. Tastes great.
Yeah, it really comes through. And I actually had bought a case of the Imperial in bottles because I was such a fan of it, and it was kind of a cool beer to have in the fridge because it was a conversation starter. And like you said, it was also a party starter. It was about like 8.7% or so. But clear bottles, the packaging, had a great label with like a frog or something. With the artwork was really creative with like a frog and like a crown. I don't know, Imperial. It had, the yeast settled at the bottom of, as in many beers. But it being in a clear bottle and being a production beer that you guys ran specially, it was kind of cool to teach people about the science of beer, what makes a craft beer. And I would, this is the yeast. This is this is essentially the sediment of what gets left over in an unfiltered style beer. So I think it's a perfect transition to talk about something we left off with in our pilot episode: ingredients. Ingredients to beer is so important, and we start with really, I guess there's 5. Great water. Right?
Great water, yeah. The DeHart Dam provides Harrisburg with excellent brewing water. It comes out of the tap right at about 7 pH, which makes it a little easier to make a beer. Being a lower pH product, it makes it easier. And some municipalities you'll see the water come out as high as 9 pH, which makes it a little harder to make a beer that is, that needs to be around 4. We're very lucky to have the water that we have here, and that's provided to us in this area.
So you start with great water. It's less work. It's a more pure product coming into the brewery. And then with the addition of the other ingredients, and we talk about the things that are so much impacted by the weather that we experience around the world, the availability of products such as hops, such as grain, and then, of course, different strains of yeast that need to be maintained in different, temperatures and cultured to continue for consistency. So let's go back. Let's talk about the stuff that grows in the fields, Artie. How has the sourcing of the grains that you use in producing Appalachian Brewing Company beers over the years, how has that process changed?
It hasn't changed a whole lot, which is great. Many of the maltsters that are out of Europe, in Germany, and all over England and those types of places. They're still providing great malt to the U.S. market, and they're thriving in a lot of cases because of that. A lot more breweries in the United States now, so that can take the time and effort to buy a little bit more expensive malt, because for us it's not about the cheapest malt we can find, 6-row malt or using adjuncts and other things to create sugar for us, but it's more about using quality so that we have a quality flavored product. That's the most important thing for us. And so buying it from those maltsters, in many cases direct, but also we buy it from wholesalers that rep malting companies, and we're getting bag after bag of great malt. It's awesome to use, and quality and the consistency have also been great over the years as well.
Okay, so that's something that you brought up. You mentioned the word sugar. Okay, so we're getting back to that idea that creating a beer takes a recipe, and every beer has a different recipe. In order to achieve alcohol in a beer, which is what's going to end up making it beer, is you've got to have yeast interact with sugar, and the result is alcohol.
That's right.
Different sugars, different yeast, they combine. Let's talk about staying with the grain portion of it, but the different types of grain, like I hear about a wheat beer. You get a rye beer. Other beers are brewed, the ones we see on the big commercials, with rice and other cheaper ingredients like corn and things like that. Things that sugar can be derived from is what we start with beer. Wheat beers are sort of obvious. But where else do we go with like a Hoppy Trails IPA? What's the base?
Most all the beers are 2-row malt based, okay? Rows of grain growing up the stalk, right? They're stripped from the stalk, and every grain that we use in certain situations goes to a malting house where they germinate the malt slightly, which creates a little tiny packet starch in the middle of that grain. And that starch then allows the brewer to convert that starch into sugar. I don't know if you remember back in high school or in college, Mike, but that starch is a long chain of sugars. We're going to go in and break that up, and that gives us that sugar that we need for fermentation.
So it's all sort of a big recipe, and it's complex, because when I think of what the recipe is for a wheat beer, I think, you go and grab a bale of wheat out of the field and you just do it, but it seems like it's more complex than that. So everything is either malted or unmalted, right? And
yeah. We can either use malted wheat, or we can use unmalted wheat in the beer. But in most cases, you're going to use mostly malted because you want that sugar from the malting process, right? But we can also use oats, rye, different types of barleys. In cream ales, we're using a little more maybe corn, which we wouldn't necessarily do because it sort of has a little bit of a bad rep to it, because people talk about corn and adjuncts being used in major manufacturing beers, right? Mm-hmm. So sometimes we would always sort of shy away from them. But now with some of the new lagers that are coming out and some of the different things, the cream ales and those types of things, we're using those types of grains. And you know what? It's great.
Yeah, using the right way, capitalize on the different flavors that those type of grains can produce, and it makes a lot of sense. All right, some different beers that are coming out these days are using a variety of yeasts. You hear the weird story about the guy who found some gross strand of yeast in his beard or something, and he created used it to bring the sugars out in the recipe of the beer. But I mean, so let's talk about yeast, because yeast is a biggie. Yeast is a living organism that is our best friend, because yeast produces alcohol, and we like to have a little bit of alcohol in our beer.
You bet. And in most cases, yeast was always a regional cells that traveled through the air, and they would inoculate the beers. That's why in many cases the brewers would put the beer up into called cool ships or cooling areas. They'd cool it down, and it would always be in the top of the rafters, because that's where the night winds would come through, and they would inoculate the beer. And that would start the process of the fermentation. And then once they got the fermentation, they got the beer cooled down enough and it was inoculated, then it would start the fermentation either in the open fermenter or the closed fermenter, depending on what the brewery had there. But the amazing thing is because of certain labs in the United States, we're able to buy yeast that could come from Munich, Germany, or it could come from outside of Munich, Germany. We can buy a yeast that is a true London Pride type yeast. We can buy all sorts of different yeasts because these yeast houses have actually been able to take these down to a single cell, and then they can now propagate it and bring it up to a large enough amount for us to bring into the brewery and use. Some breweries use the labs. Some breweries keep their own cultures, which is, it's a great thing if you can do it, because then you always have those different yeasts available. But if not, we can really rely upon these great labs that can send us a sample culture to get started, and then we can bring it up and produce it from there.
And then in some cases, you can keep that batch of yeast alive for a while and brew multiple batches, with it, right? So it's not just a one and done. It's you keep it, brew some beer with it, keep some, feed it, and it'll grow, and then you use it again, right?
That's right. It's a living organism in our brewery. As long as you take care of it, you feed it when it's working right and it's producing the alcohol for you, and then when it goes dormant, keep it cold. You keep it dormant, but you don't want it to be there too long. So you want to use it pretty quickly. But then what you take is the yeast off of a batch, and we're going to pitch that or add it to 3 subsequent batches. And then that would be called a generation of yeast, right? Of that generation of yeast, we're going to pick the best one out of that generation and pitch that into 3 beers, let's say, and that becomes the second generation of that yeast. So it's ongoing process, and we try to work anywhere between 10 and 15 generations, and then we sort of back up and start over.
It's just so much to take in.
It really is.
It's not as if there's so many people that for so many years just got off on a Friday night and drove to the local beer distributor, picked up a briefcase of some cans of something, and put it in the fridge, and never thought about it again. And then the craft beer industry hit, and all of a sudden we're thinking about what's in our beer, and it's just so great.
Yeah, it really is. Ever since we started, Mike, we have been in the education business. A lot of people say, what are you in? You in the restaurant business? You in the brewery business? What are you in? And I always said, we're in the education business. We're teaching people of what beer is. It's not what you would see on the commercial on TV. It's something much more than that. It's real. It has a life to it. It pretty much creates itself. All we're doing is giving it the right atmosphere to do so. So, that's the joy that I've always gotten out of beer, is I just see it as so amazing of a process. It's very simple, but to do it well, it takes a lot of really important steps, and you've got to stick to those steps and make sure that you're following through with every little detail.
All right. Talk so much about the beer and the brew pubs and the food, but there is another ABC, Appalachian Brewing Company brand, that is maybe even more widely distributed than the beer these days, Artie, and that's Appalachian Brewing Company craft soda. And you can literally find it up and down the East Coast, and find it in so many different stores and boutiques. The brands, the root beer, the diet root beer, the white birch beer, the ginger beer, all of them just great craft natural sodas. And the facility in which they're bottled and brewed is over on the west shore of Harrisburg, Mechanicsburg, and that is where you guys offer a pretty cool experience for people who are huge fans of Appalachian craft soda.
You bet, Mike. You can come in and do our Soda Works factory tour. We call it the Make Your Own Soda Tour. And you come in, you get a tour. We show you around. We show you the whole process. We teach you about how we produce a soda, and you actually get to create your own soda. You can pick from all these different flavors that we have. You get the water, you get the syrup, and you blend everything together and you carbonate it, and we give you a couple bottles, one to maybe have a little bit there and then some to take home with you. So it's a pretty cool process, and you can join us Saturday and Sunday afternoons, 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock. But if you have a group or something like that, you're welcome to give us a ring, and we'll set up a private tour for you. Got a great team there that works on this, and it's just a great little process.
Saturdays, 1 o'clock at ABC Mechanicsburg. It is the Make Your Own Soda Appalachian Soda Works factory tour. Learn the history, tour the plant. Private groups by request, as Artie said. All right, Artie, so we talked about the grain and the yeast, but now, well, for many people, the star of the show, I'd say the fresh ingredient, as far as a lot of people are concerned, that sharp, that really flavorful profile that everybody loves in an IPA is the hops. The hops, the star of the show in the IPA, but also so vital in the beer making process. So let's start with it. What is hops? Where does it come from? Where do we source it here at Appalachian?
Well, hops they grow on a vine. They're part of the cannabis family. Unlike cannabis, which grows on a tree, they grow on a vine, usually about 16 feet up. And if you ever see a hop farm, you'll see a lot of poles with wires strung between the poles and then small ropes hanging down, which the actual hops will climb up the ropes. And then when you cut them down, you cut down the ropes along with the hops. They strip the cones off. So there's these buds, they're cones, and that's really what we're looking for. We're looking for that little cone because that cone has all sorts of good yumminess to it, right? Mm-hmm. It's got bitterness to it. Little glands that impart bitterness into beer. It's got flavors and aromas that come out of the hop leaves themselves. So what we are able to do is take those hops. Really, a cool thing that's happened more recently is we're actually now working with a lot of hop farmers. We used to buy almost solely through distribution, wholesalers that would provide hops to us. But we can create relationships with a hop grower in England. We can create a relationship with a hop grower in Germany, in Oregon, in the United States. And they can actually grow specific hops for us, which is really cool. And now we're buying it on that side of the market, which is great as well. So when we look at those hops and we add them in, the more hops you add, the more bitter the beer's going to be. One thing that's changed more than anything is we used to always look at international bittering units as being a representative of how hoppy a beer was.
And that's when you look at a label of a beer, there's a couple of things there. There's ABV, mm-hmm. That's alcohol by volume.
That's right.
And then you're also going to get IBUs. So that's international bittering units, and that's measuring basically the effect or the amount of hops in there. So if it's a higher number, that means it's hoppier, more bitter.
Yeah, that's right. And every hop has its alpha acid rating. So we look at that rating, we can put it into a formula, and that formula allows us to determine theoretical bitterness of the beer is going to be. What's changed so much is we used to try to get 80 IBUs, 90 IBUs, 100 IBUs, and we were making them hoppier. But what's happened more recently is everybody's adding the hops at the very end. So the only way that you get bitterness out of hops is to boil it. That bitterness comes out through the boil. But now there's so many aromatic hop varieties that are being produced that if we add them in the very end, they don't give you a lot of bitterness, but they sure give you some really cool citrus and different spicy and all sorts of different type of flavors that we can now add into beers. And these IPAs that you see now, each one of them has a very distinct, not only bitterness to it, because you still have some bittering hops in there, but more so. Now it's on the much lower level, but all the hop is in the aroma and flavor now.
So the name India Pale Ale, it comes from, my history is not that great, Artie, but it came from somebody taking a big, long trip across the ocean from India or something, and
yeah, that's right.
I think it was military guys or something. Again, people, you can kill me on this if you want to. Just email Artie and say. But the long story short is hops became an agent for preserving the beer as they made this long journey across the ocean. So when they got there, they still had something they could drink, and the idea was we were going to load it up with these hops. And then when it got over to the land where they needed to be in whatever country they were invading or whatever, this is great history, and this is not the education portion. This is just that.
Are you a historian, Mike? Sounds like it.
Anyway, what they ended up with was the original form of a hoppy beer. And so, over the course of centuries, I guess this became perfected, and what we have now is 3, 4, 5. IPAs on tap where the hop is the star. It's hop forward in the flavor profile, and you can choose from a number of IPAs. I actually have people come over to the house for parties, Artie, sometimes, and they'll be like, like I'm like, what do you want? What do you want to drink? I'm like, I have some domestic light beer or something or they go, you got any regular beer? You got one of them IPAs? They'll say, but they don't understand what an IPA is they don't understand the difference between an IPA and a craft beer because they're maybe new to the scene, and everywhere they go, it's like a whole menu of IPAs, so they think everything's an IPA.
Yeah, it's almost synonymous now. You know, some people look at it and go, "Hey, is that one of those IPA beers?"
Right.
What is that? So, understanding the different styles of beer is another thing that we've always educated people on. And when we go back to the hops, Mike, we always look at, malt is very sweet. We talked about that earlier. Yeah. The malt is sweet, so the hops are bitter, right? And that hop and malt blend together to create a balance. And that's really, when you look at good craft beer, you always want to look at the balance portion of that beer and say, is this beer balanced? Is it overly bitter, but there's not enough maybe not enough sweetness to balance it out? Or sometimes is it overly sweet without, even with a beer that's pretty sweet, you still need something to dry that sweetness up in the end a little bit, Right. Otherwise it just is cloying and it lays on your tongue and it's just sweet. No, we don't want that. And so that's what we look to do, is we always look to keep the beer as balanced as possible, and we make small changes throughout the process in order to try to keep it right on track.
And I think hops are so interesting, as you mentioned. You see them growing locally now. People may not have the vast plantation or meadow space that they would have over in Germany or places where they've been growing them and making a living off of for hundreds of years. However, if someone's got 10 acres, 20 acres, and they can dedicate some of that space to a crop, hops wasn't really an option, 10 years ago, but it's an option now because they know at least once a year when they harvest that hop product that they're going to be able to sell it fresh to somebody at a brewery. And no different, ABC has local relationships along with those, international relationships, or the ones out on the West Coast here of the U.S. Let's talk about that. So you've met up with some local hop farmers, and the process of those hops being delivered same day, most cases to the brewery. It's kind of exciting to put that fresh product right into the beer.
Yeah, actually, our fresh hop pale ale, we make a pale ale with that, is a great beer. The hops, when they come out of the field, have a much different feel and flavor to them than they would have if they're dried and some of the moisture's taken out of them. So we try to use those fresh hops right out of the field. They're a little more expensive because they're much heavier, right? They still have the water in them, and you still pay by the pound, but that's okay because we're supporting those local farmers that are these guys work their tails off. Mm-hmm. It is not an easy product to grow. It's not an easy product to keep away from different molds and fungus and pests, and it's not and it's an even harder product to package and process. You really need to have the right machine to pull all the vines down. You need a machine to pull cones off. You need a machine to dry them, grind them up, pelletize them, so that a regular brewery could use that. We always take that for granted because we call and order boxes of hops and they come pelletized, and we're tossing into beer, and you don't think about all the process that happens prior to that, the horticulture that goes into it and everything else. But we're so lucky to have the types of products that we have and the availability now in the marketplace. We can get anything we want just about at any time to make a great beer.
And I like that you mentioned that, because part of the brewery atmosphere of brewing a lot of beer and having to keep those recipes consistent is about, how do I measure this product? If you used fresh hops all the time with the water still in them right off the vine, and they were so, first of all, it would be cost prohibitive because it would be so expensive. You could only brew beer about 1 month out of the year when they're actually harvested.
That's right.
So you've got to get them. They've got to be processed in a way, though, that is still natural. So there's a couple of ways that hops arrive at a brewery. Number one, we talked about that seasonal special opportunity that you might get with the fresh hops, where they're still fresh, just like you'd pick them from a garden, a strawberry from your own garden, bring it into the house. It's juicy and everything, and voluptuous and great, and it sits there on the windowsill for a day or two before it starts drying out. But then you've also got a dried whole leaf version, right? Or maybe like a press it to save some space, but then it's dried. But then more commonly, what I would look at as almost looks like pet food. Okay, the same way that you would buy a bag of like not dog food or cat food, but like if you ever had a gerbil and
Sure.
it comes in those little pellets and they look like. Or another thing is if you've got a wood stove at home, a wood pellet,
Yeah,
burning
you bet.
stove.
Same process.
They look like a wood pellet except it's green and it's softer. It's softer and it comes in. That's how they dry this mass quantity of hops. They crush them and grind them down into almost like a powder, keeping some of that structure of the actual plant. But then it gets pressed into a pellet, and that allows the breweries like yourselves to take a scoop, put it on a scale, and measure it consistently. We need so many pounds of this one, and when you can measure it with that poundage, that comes in a pelletized form, it's consistent and keeps the beer tasting good.
Yeah, you bet. And, we used to use a lot of whole hops in the past, but more so now pellets. The problem with whole hops is they're very leafy, and they'll plug up anything that you put them in. So if you throw in a bunch of whole leaf hops and you try to pull it out of a small drain, it'll just plug it up right away. So the pelletized hops really help us a lot because they can actually move with the liquid a lot better than the whole hops will. A quick story, and we visited a hop farm in Poland, and they had their own manufacturing or processing portion. They told us they used to have something called Yellowman. I don't know if you ever heard the story, but the whole hops, the way they would pack them into burlap bags is these guys would actually drop with their feet and push down on the hops. And then they'd climb back up, they'd throw more in there, and they'd jump back down, and they'd stomp them in, and then they'd climb back out and jump back in. Well, because those glands that I talked about earlier in the hops are yellow, they'd come out and they'd be totally yellow because they were jumping in the hops, right? So it's an interesting story that I heard. You don't hear about it very often, but it's something that you go to these manufacturing plant tours, and you always find something cool that you find out in the history of hops. But now it's all processed and pressed, of course, mechanically. But that sure is a lot of fun to hear about how, they came up with a solution for pressing them into the bales. When you store the bales, you can have a box of pelletized hops, and it's, this smaller box, and it'll fit, on a shelf easily. That same amount of hops, if it was whole hop, would be a bale the size of
right.
similar to
You'd
the size of a small
field.
hay bale. Yeah. Right. So, that also helps us along too because it keeps it fresher because it's held away from oxygen. The pressed whole hops will have still some oxygen in there. You can try to get some of it out, but mostly it has it in there. So it oxidizes a little bit. The hops in the middle may be a little bit better because they don't have as much oxygen hitting them. But with those hops, we're able to store so much more and have a smaller storage area than we would have if we normally had those bales.
Interesting. Hops have now appeared in, I bought a bag of pretzels last week, and hops was among the ingredients. They were called like craft beer pretzels.
Oh, yeah,
and
there
when I took the first bite, it was a little dry. It was a little dry,
okay.
but it lived up to the billing because on the aftertaste, I could taste the hops. And as a craft beer drinker, I appreciated that. All right, so we'll take a quick moment here to dial it back and we'll talk about what's going on around the restaurants, the brew pubs of Appalachian Brewing Company. Artie, what's on the menu here as we transition into the hot summer season?
One of my favorite new items that we have on the menu is the brie and prosciutto sandwich.
Oh, yeah.
I just love it. We put a fig jam on there, and you get it. They toast it up nicely, cut it, and serve it with either fries or, you can get it with fries, sweet potato fries, onion rings, or a side salad. And it sure is great. I should eat the side salad more often, Mike. But
yeah,
as you can see, I prefer the beer and the fries.
But Fig Jam was also your nickname in college, is that right?
Is that right? That's a great name for a band.
Fig Jam. That's great. So we talk about the sandwich. We also, maybe you're just coming in here looking for sit at one of the beautiful outdoor dining spaces that many of the brew pubs offer. They got the big deck in Harrisburg. There's the patio in Mechanicsburg. Gettysburg has an outdoor seating location. I want to just sit down, have a beer, and maybe munch on a salad. What's something good?
I always go back to the old Nutty Fruity salad, with the hoppy poppy dressing.
Oh, yeah.
Not that we don't really rhyme a lot here at the brewery, but the Nutty Fruity with the Hoppy Poppy, that's one that you can go to every time, and it's got the walnuts and the craisins on that salad, and just
Balsamic.
Balsamic, yeah, you can do the balsamic on there. Yeah, that's good too.
Speaking my language.
Yeah, no doubt. So those are two of the ones that I've been enjoying mostly now that it's getting hotter out.
All right, come in, grab a bite, grab a beer, grab a craft soda. Harkens back to the local feel. You say it all the time here at ABC. Drink local, support local. Do that with the ingredients as much as you can. Make the local people happy. Bring them back. Make this their local watering hole. And make it a place that you can check out whenever you're in town. For more information on Appalachian Brewing Company at all times, to send Artie a question we might answer here on the podcast, just go to abcbrew.com. Artie, I think we'll wrap it up. This is officially our first episode because, honestly, the last one was more of a pilot.
Yeah, Mike, it's amazing. When I first thought about doing this, I was like worried. Oh gosh, how are we going to come up with 10 minutes worth of information?
10 minutes.
But it turned into 30 minutes, and guess what? Here we are, and God, I'm just having such a blast. So I'm looking forward to when I get to come back and spend some time with you again.
All right, Artie, well said. Always something new on tap at Appalachian Brewing Company, whichever location is closest to you. Head in, have fun, make some memories, right?
Love to see you.
All right. For Artie, I'm Mike on the podcast of Appalachian Brewing Company. Until next time, cheers.
Cheers.